Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Evolving Web, too, for bringing in me and bringing in Trustworthy for everyone. They're providing you with books. I'm providing you with content. There's going to be a difference, yeah. And I want to talk about that, like what it means to be providing content. I mean, there's such kind of like vague terms. But the way I approach this, sort of my lens on the world as a content strategist, you know, and everything is looking like a nail, you're armed with that hammer. The way I approach this is, I'm happy to be here, but I don't trust you. You shouldn't trust me either, Brian. I saw your eyebrows go up on that, like, oh, where's she going with that? It's a little bold. You shouldn't trust me because I haven't given you any reason to yet. We haven't maybe engaged in conversation. We haven't exchanged content in the parlance of our day. So to that end, I want to talk about what does it mean to exchange content to build trust, and why that should matter to you, whether you are a creative director, a designer, a developer, a user researcher, an engineer, a project manager, anyone else in between that helps to make the modern web. We need to exchange content to build trust because we fundamentally have a trust problem nowadays. So yeah, I want to talk about problems and opportunities, but we're going to start with problems because we move on and upward from there. So when we talk about trust, I look at it from the perspective that over the past decade, we've seen how people have grown more cynical. Maybe marketing messages fall flat, sales cycles take longer than they used to, and for a while we could say, well, we'll blame it on the pandemic, and then we could say, well, we'll blame it on coming out of the pandemic. Now we just have to say, ooh, things have changed, and we need to reckon with that change, because that change now takes the form of lack of trust and a slower industry and lagging in the industry, and we see how that affects things like hiring cycles beyond just sales cycles. And that's a problem for certainly all of us that either are gainfully employed or seek gainfully employment, which I would like to think is all of us. So when we think about how to earn trust, we have to step back first and think, well, how do we get into this place of cynicism? Because today, in an age of fake news, we see how people are kind of largely turning away. It used to be that people looked to experts for guidance on maybe how to think or what to think about. Maybe there was like the news bureau that they always trusted, or the reporters that they always looked to at those news bureaus. Or maybe they were trusted brands across a lot of different industries, maybe who they were going to be partnering with as far as different vendors and whatnot, or even just where were they going out to eat that night? How were they planning their next vacation? So I think this affects us both in B2C and B2B realms. And as we look across all of that, we need to say, well, what's happening there? People are turning away from experts. Maybe they're trying to take refuge in their filter bubble, until they realize that, oh, these friends here in my filter bubble, they're really just algorithms too. Maybe that's increasing now more than ever in the age of AI. So they're turning away, maybe bursting those filter bubbles, and instead saying, well, I'm just gonna trust myself. I'm gonna go with my gut. That doesn't always work out so well, though, when we've kind of been marinating in fake news and in questionable resources. It's kind of the equivalent of, can you really go with your gut when your gut has been like steeped in Doritos and Twizzlers and junk food? No, that's bad things happen there. We don't want that kind of like gut. And there's a great metaphor in there for gut bacteria in the current information age too that I would love to explore with any of you over lunchtime, because that'll be a fun next metaphor right there. So when we look at how people are losing confidence, maybe in the world around them, and then turning within only to realize maybe they can't trust their own gut instincts. That problem of losing confidence is playing out in real ways. We've lost the ability to make good decisions, or even just to feel comfortable and confident in our decisions. To be able to make good decisions and then feel good about the decisions that we make. And that's what happens when people grow cynical. We look at the world around us and say, no, not for me. Everybody's out to get you. And it used to be just something that you'd hear from maybe like older generations, whatever generation you were in. The older generation was the, they're out to get you generation. Now it's coming out of our mouths too. It's not just because we've all gotten older. Maybe that has happened too, I don't know. But that problem of cynicism, that it seems safe, that's an issue, that's a problem for anybody that's in the business of engaging users, of helping people to help themselves, whether it's to maybe, I know there's a lot of folks here from academia, maybe it's to like research a college or institution and say, is that the right one for me? Or even, is higher education right for me? Because I've been hearing a lot of other things about that getting in my head. Or somebody that's trying to make a decision of like, is this the right car for me, or the right radio to install in the car? Can I trust the information that I'm getting around how to maybe fix my car? Do I know where to turn to for good information to maybe decide to partner with a different organization? Is my boss going to be upset with me about the recommendations that I make? If we're in the business of helping people help themselves to gain information, we need to look at what are those roadblocks? What are the hurdles to acquiring information? So how do we move on from that? Because I think, yeah, this is our problem now. We need to look at how we empower people, how we help them gain hope and gain certainty in the process that they can learn, that they can become smarter. And I think that issue, that's almost one of idealism. I think it was, well, in the words of George Carlin, I think he put it that if you scratch a cynic, you're going to find a disappointed idealist. And that's kind of where we are now. But that problem of what we do with maybe our old selves, our more naive selves, what we do to help our users kind of tap back into that sense of hope, I don't think that problem is so insurmountable. Because I think all of us have the tools to address it, regardless of how you approach building the modern web. I think we have the tools to address it. I mean, we talk a lot about how now people kind of marinate in this idea of like, well, I'm going to just keep scrolling. And, I think that comes actually from a place of like, maybe there is something better. Maybe I can still keep learning something before I finally set down my phone at the end of the night and give in to sleep. Maybe that's not doom scrolling. Maybe that's hope scrolling. Maybe that's saying, maybe there's something else out there for me. Maybe there's more information that I have the power to acquire. So I think if we want to address this, we have to go back. Not just pre-pandemic, but pre-internet. I want to kind of hop into the Wayback Machine, scoot us back to pre-Renaissance. Pre-Renaissance commerce in Europe, because I think we can learn a lot from that. Specifically, I think we can learn a lot from how things were changing at that time, because the problems that we're encountering, those are not necessarily new problems. So if we go back to like the 1500s, that's when a lot of things were changing in Europe. Many things, I'm just going to address the commerce side of things. So it used to be that if you were, say, a farmer or a merchant at that time, you would haul your wares from town to town in a region, maybe to different farm stands as well as farmers markets. Maybe you'd be selling like cloth or candles or salt. And maybe you'd do pretty good business like that. But around that time, that's when a lot of merchants discovered that they could actually do better, not by going from town to town in a region, but rather by staying put and engaging in arbitrage among multiple towns, multiple cities and countries across Europe. The catch for that, though, the way they needed to do that and do that well, was to employ people that they could trust in those different cities, to kind of tell them what was going on. So that brings us to this guy. You can see he's got some early proto-Post-it notes tacked up behind him there. This is the father of modern project management. Now, he isn't. This guy, it doesn't matter really who he is, but I will tell you, he deserves the credit here. This is George Gies. And he was a merchant in the 1500s that represents this sort of emerging class of merchants that decided, let's stay put, build empires. In order to do that, though, we need to employ people that live in the cities and towns and countries around us to tell us what is going on in those places. So he would employ a series of letter writers, of foreign correspondents, of really the earliest journalists, to write him periodic updates. Was there talk of going to a war? Okay, that's a place that might need more metal then. Or is there talk of maybe palace intrigue and they're going to be having a lot of like balls and things that require a lot of fancy fabrics? Okay, let's get that going on there. And the merchants, they would employ these journalists to write them periodic updates that were fairly consistent in voice. So they could tell, like, oh, is somebody writing with like a greater sense of alarm now? Do I need to act with maybe a greater sense of speed or alacrity? They would also employ a consistent volume of information to give them the level of detail that they could count on, as well as operate with a degree of vulnerability. They weren't over-promising, they weren't saying, only I know the truth, only I know the best perspective on the world, trust only me. No, they were willing to say, yeah, the last time I wrote you, it looked like we were going to war. Good news, we've been able to marry off this cousin to that cousin, disregard that they're cousins, and now we're no longer going to war. Instead, we're going to be celebrating a lot, so send other things. We can buy in other things now. So that idea of being able to say, I'm going to get some things wrong, here's how I'm going to correct them. You know that you can rely on me because we've built up this kind of confidence. You know the tone and the level of detail in which I write. That was something that those merchants could come to count on. And we can learn a lot from that because those journalists would empower the people to whom they were writing. They would empower their merchants with information that they could come to expect. And that degree of accountability in communication, that's something that we still appreciate now. We still look to people in those positions of authority now because they're able to go where we cannot. The same way those journalists were going and living in places where their letter recipients could not. It's being able to say, I'm here, you're not, so let me tell you about it. That is essentially what authority is. Maybe because you can't go there because of the distance or the cost or the danger involved. I would also say there's probably less danger involved, but the folks in marketing that sit down the hall from a product development team, they have authority that people outside a company, their target audiences, do not have. They have access that they do not have. And that access tied to authority, we all appreciate it. That's why when Anderson Cooper comes to us from a place where there's been an earthquake or there's a war going on, we stop and listen and pay attention. Or when David Chang, the owner of the Momofuku chain and the star of Ugly Delicious and other television shows now as well, when he stops to talk with us about maybe a new cuisine or Cajun Asian fusion, we stop and listen and pay attention. Or when Flavia Questarton sat down with Anthony Bourdain to talk about Senegalese food, we stopped and listened and paid attention because they're willing to go where maybe we cannot or choose not to go. And they're willing to take us along on a journey of discovery, take us along maybe even to correct some of their own previous beliefs and misconceptions. Good leaders are willing to get vulnerable for their audiences. Good marketers, good designers, good researchers are willing to get vulnerable and say, okay, let me tell you what's going on here. I've been reading a lot from Jay Rosen, the press critic, and he talks about authority as simply being this right to be listened to because you can offer a report that users cannot easily get on their own. Yeah, sometimes the person with authority is a journalist, sometimes it's a marketer. Sometimes it's someone in user research. Sometimes it's somebody on the development team that's willing to go out and say, here's what we can bring back into our organization, and also let's report better for the broader industry on our own roadmap so our users know what to expect, what they can come to appreciate about us, what they can look forward to. The issue, the sort of pitfall that we need to avoid with authority, though, is inconsistency. That's the stuff when it's with an inconsistent voice or maybe surprising level of detail and sins of omission. That's the stuff that undermines authority. And we know what that looks like. We know what it looks like when a brand suddenly is like deviating from the path that it's been on, and all of their users, all of their target audiences are suddenly like, whoa, what's going on there? Didn't expect to see that. We know what that feels like because it actually erodes our very ability to trust, to make sound decisions and feel like we knew what to expect from an organization. Now, what the hell's going on with it there? We know what that problem looks like in facts and figures, too. This number, you can see the date on it. When I first started gathering it, this comes from Edelman Trust Barometer in 2018. 63% of people in the US population said they couldn't differentiate between what was real news and fake news. That number has only grown. We don't report on it so well now. So I think, yeah, this is a big problem. I said I was going to start with problems, then move into opportunities. This is our problem because I think, again, whether you're a copywriter or a content strategist or designer or lead an organization or you're the newest person in the social media team in an organization, this is our problem if we expect to do things that move the needle for our companies or our institutions, if we expect to do things that will inform or persuade our different audiences and want them to take action. We talk about having information that is actionable from organizations that are transparent, but those are a lot of big, juicy buzzwords if we're not willing to like put some time and effort into unpacking them. So let's do that, because I think this is really the secret, sort of the problem statement for the future of our work. To regain their trust, we must empower our audiences. We need to meet them where they are and help them get to where we need them to go in terms of learning new material, maybe expanding their vocabulary to better understand and assess their purchase decisions, in terms of gaining confidence in the direction that an industry is going. We can do that. And by we, I mean smart institutions that are willing to be strategic with how they use content and design to build trust. And I'm saying we because I want to include myself in that as one of those smart organizations as a consultant. But also I want to say we because I want to invite you to do that, because it's easy to just kind of keep churning out content or updating the user interface without thinking like, are these choices actually going to earn trust, or do they, in a sense, erode it? And when we do that, we run the risk of negating all of our work, of losing our audiences. So we need to work to rebuild their trust. And the way that we do that, the way that we regain their trust in our organizations, it uses the same tools that those merchants counted on. It uses the same tools that those letter writers used so well. Because yeah, I think we're in a really difficult place right now. We've been in this place for the past few years. I would say it goes back probably about 6-7 years if you look at our election cycles as well. And we're kind of in that vehicle that is just, it's stuck in the mud, and we just keep giving it gas. And when that happens, the tires just churn in a little bit deeper until somebody has that great idea of like, wait, let's sprinkle some kitty litter underneath like the wheels so that we gain traction. I'm seeing some blank faces and blank stares at that, so I hope some of you have been literally stuck in mud before and can relate to that. It's not just a metaphor. So yeah, I want to look at how we can attempt to better inform and persuade our audiences, how we can empower them. Because as I said, yes, this is a problem, but I think we can also ground our next steps in hope. So here's what that looks like, because it gets us back to this guy, this idea of authority. How we move forward from here is by establishing authority. And that authority, this effort, has 3 major pillars to it, 3 components. And they look a lot like what those letter writers were using before. So we'll start with voice. This is probably a familiar term to anybody that's ever either worked to develop copy or sat down the hall from people that do. So voice is simply that effort, that act of telling an audience who you are and establishing a tone that says how you are and if they can trust what they know about you, as well as where you're going. There's that how you build a voice over time. Now, sometimes when we talk about voice, we're also talking about consistency, because if you want a voice, you want it to be consistent. Otherwise, it becomes kind of either staccato or disparate and scattered, and there's no sense of who are the people, what's the organization behind this. So I want to take a beat on that. And this is a question that I always start out with my clients, of first figuring out, well, who are you? What do you stand for? What's the hierarchy of communication goals that maybe reflects a common belief within your organization? Maybe like 3 or 4 things. Maybe are you first innovative, and then do you want to be known for being smart or wise? What's the difference between smart and wise? Do you think of your organization as cutting edge or bleeding edge or leading edge? I don't know if there's any difference there. I'm going to just shut this because it's getting a little chatty out there. Thank you. I wasn't going to just walk out and leave you and let you sit with these thoughts a little. Think about what you've done. So, think about, though, what your organization has done. Does it always communicate in a consistent way what you are and who you are? Would everyone in your target audience be able to say, oh, yeah, Chewy, I know what they stand for? And would they be able to list off like the top 3 things? Or if you looked across maybe prospective students and donors and alumni at RISD, would they all be able to associate that institution with the same like 3 or 4 big qualities? Because it's establishing that hierarchy of communication goals, of first saying, here's who we are, here's who we're not. Here are the qualities that maybe better describe a competitor, or that we would just never want to have associated with our brand or our industry. It's by figuring that out that first you develop a platform for a consistent voice. Interestingly, that is also how you develop a platform for generative AI. So we achieve that clarity and consistency that can sometimes start to feel a little bit maybe too locked in, a little too boring. It grounds our audience, but also that's the platform from which we can start to train our models to start to develop content on behalf of our organizations too. I won't call it an issue in here, but I will say the opportunity gap here is that when you start to communicate in a monolithic, predictable way, because you're an AI, maybe, the one ingredient you're missing is that understanding of nuance and being able to read the room. That's what we humans still do so well. So I want to talk about how you do that in a way that's not boring, how you lean into voice to establish trust. So here's an organization, not boring, because they've changed. They've changed even since I put together this slide. MailChimp, now part of Intuit MailChimp. For a long time, they were looked at as one of the big marketing organizations that could be a touchstone for lots of other brands in marketing, in B2B and B2C, across the spectrum because of how they developed content. And when they first started out, they were a marketing organization serving other marketing organizations. They were a cute little small business. Now that small business has more than half of all the world's email marketing running through its servers. They've grown, they've changed over time, they've grown to expand and offer other services, now e-commerce as well. And all through that time, they worked to maintain a consistent voice that could also flex to support the needs of different content creators, as well as different consumers of their information, whether they were getting like email marketing or guidance or error messages. So they started out kind of monolithic brand. You used to hear a lot from Freddie, the MailChimp monkey. Sometimes you'd get error messages in the voice of a little monkey, which was totally not going to throw you for a loop there. And they use this bold yellow. This is Cavendish yellow. I don't know if anybody here is really into fruit, but Cavendish is the major type species of banana that we get in this country. So they've maintained that presence, but also grown over time. kind of flexed with their voice, allowed it to evolve in the evolving web. Now their style guidelines support how do we build trust for different audiences. When we have people that are new to marketing or maybe new to our platform, we're going to speak to them in one way. When we've got people that are maybe coming from a competitor or just have more experience, okay, let's figure out how we can up-level our voice to speak to them with more nuance and more detail. They've also grown to reflect that they're producing a lot of different content that doesn't always come from their own internal content producers. They engage with a lot of freelancers as well. This was from one of their recent annual reports. You can see, still uses the Cavendish yellow, but now they're using a lot more typefaces. They've grown to say, we're growing over time. We're adding new products, but we're still Jenny from the block. You can still trust us. If you've been with us for a long time, know that we're still the brand you know. And that's a really important message for them, not to say, because what would sound less authentic than saying, trust me, you know me, but by showing that they're an organization that their longtime customers can still recognize, and speaking in a voice that their longtime customers still recognize, even though they're adding new platforms and new services. Customers who were worried that, are they going to be abandoned? Are they going to be forgotten? Have been able to stay on over time because it's still a brand that they can go to and recognize. They know where the company has come from, so it's easier for them to understand where the company is growing and where they're going. So I want to move on now and talk a little bit about volume, or the level of detail that goes into copy as well as in design. So volume refers to how much you say in length and level of detail visually and verbally. It's the answering that question of how many images should be in a gallery, how detailed should our images and diagrams be, how long should a blog post be, how many characters are appropriate for a subhead or for a headline, and can we be consistent with that? It's answering that question of what is enough to build trust with our audience. We answer that question of enough typically through user research, by saying, well, did our audience get enough information to make a good decision and feel good about the decision that they made? Which sounds awfully qualitative. But then we can say, well, we can check that then maybe in the rate of product returns and how much time somebody is spending on the site before deciding to either leave or spend more time here. That's what Crutchfield Electronics does. They've got a lot of content on their site. If you've ever shopped for a camera lens or home audio equipment from them, or if you've done your research by going to their site, gather up lots of information, then choosing to go elsewhere to actually purchase, this is what you'd encounter. So I zoomed way out on one of their pages. They're long pages. And what they see is that when somebody's coming here maybe to research purchasing a new camera lens, let's say, they can compare like what do different images look like, what does like the zoom look like on the lens, maybe let me look at it in terms of different diagrams, side-by-side images. And what they find is that when people get to the end of these really long pages, they click to go to another really long page. Their audience loves to gird their decisions in research. That's what makes them feel confident. And it plays out really well for them. There, when you see kind of how people are making good decisions, they're gaining comfort in their ability to do research, in their ability to look at the evidence of their own eyes and say, yes, this is what's right for me. I am smart enough to make this decision. And I think today when we see a world where politicians and media may gaslight us into saying, oh, don't trust the evidence of your own eyes. Don't just go with your instincts or your own personal experience on this. Only look to us. You can't possibly know. I think when we have to counter that kind of world, organizations that are willing to step up and say, you know what? Let me help you become smarter. I'm not going to dumb things down. I'm going to help you smarten up because maybe you're a photographer, or maybe you're somebody that has been doing a lot of research around camera lenses. You can make a good decision. We're going to help you do that. That works out really well for organizations that invest in building trust. It works out really well for Crutchfield. I had the opportunity to sit down with Julie Govan, their brand manager, and she shared that we want people to have enough confidence to feel like they can make a decision. So again, running against that trend that we've been seeing where people feel just sort of stuck and unable to make simple decisions or even more complex ones in their organizations. We want them to feel good about their choices from the moment they click add to cart until the product shows up at their house. So they're measuring, did we provide enough content, with the rate of product returns. They see people come back to the site again and again because that is their trusted source for feeling smarter. Another organization that really invests in content, a local one, America's Test Kitchen. So they produce more than a dozen cookbooks every year. There's Cooks Illustrated, Cooks Country, there's cooking shows, there's their website, their Instagram feed. Again, zoomed out on one of their pages, it is also really, really long. And they're all about meeting their audience where they are. So if you're somebody that is a novice chef, you can see things broken down in really, really simple steps. Maybe if you realized, oh, it's your turn to cook tonight, you've been scrolling on your phone, scrolling, not doom scrolling, and you're like, oh, I hope I can make dinner tonight. You can find a recipe just in their Instagram feed where for every image, the instructions on getting to that step are right there in the text. They make it easy. But if you're somebody that's a more advanced chef or you love the idea of sitting down with a magazine when it comes in and poring over the history of particular cooking techniques or ingredients, they got you there too. Because they're putting in the effort to meet their audiences where they are, meet their users where they are, to really set them up for success. So when I spoke with their chief creative officer, Jack Bishop, he had really wonderful things to share about what makes a good chocolate chip cookie. He also shared, though, that their approach to creating content is not simply to say, here's how you got to do it, we know. They are well positioned to say, we know, because they're known for testing things out a million different times, or they were trying to find like the world's best, air fryer, so they tried 30 different models. They're well positioned to say, trust us, we know. But instead, they show you the evidence of their thinking. They encourage you to collect that evidence as well, to gain experience. And that's all because, as he says, we're not teaching people to look to us as kind of the leader in the corner there, that only we can be trusted. We're not saying, like, hey, this is a cult of personality. They're selling the science. They're selling personal success. As he says, success breeds confidence. When somebody does right, doing their research with you, or has that good experience of getting smarter with you, they're inclined to come back and say, what else can I gain from you? Because I trust you. Not because you told me to trust you, but because I've made that choice to trust you. So we know that confident decisions require content. It's not always more content. Great example of this is the change that's gone on with gov.uk. So it used to be that there were some 9 different websites where British citizens could get information about how to pay taxes, or if they were looking to import something to the country, what sort of paperwork they needed to fill out. You could get that information from 9 different websites, which, as you can imagine, is code for version control problems. And frequently what people did in order to get information they could trust, they turned away from the government. They looked instead to the Guardian, kind of paper of record. The team at gov.uk adopted a new approach. They said, rather than creating so much content, let's create content on only the things that only we can create content. In other words, if somebody's looking to, say, import bees into the country, they fancy themselves a beekeeper. Okay, we shouldn't be providing information about like climate and agriculture and what's the right bee for you. No, we just need to say, here's the form you got to fill out. All that other stuff, better positioned to come from some sort of agricultural organization or farm board. We're not in that business. Let's produce less content. Let's produce only the content that only we can produce. And with that mindset, they chipped away from some 75,000 pages of content down to just 3,000 on a single site. far fewer version control issues, a lot more happy users, as well as a much happier content team creating and maintaining that kind of content. And the way that they knew that they had enough is, again, through user research, bringing people in, saying, can you find these things? And frequently what they were hearing was, that was almost too easy. I got what I needed from the government. I know that's kind of a weird expression to hear or even say, especially here. So let's also talk now about vulnerability. So voice and volume, I think, are more or less table stakes of good content, considering those things. Vulnerability is where it all comes together. It's where we say, how do we really engage our audiences and make them want to engage with us? What do we do to open ourselves up for that kind of connection? So vulnerability is really the cost of connection. It's that cost of transparency, if we're willing to use transparency as more than just a buzzword. And for many organizations, when they're considering, like, what does it mean to be vulnerable, they might think of that as like a weakness. And it's not. For many organizations that are willing to like open themselves up, to admit to mistakes or bring their harshest critics closer, it's a strength that builds rapport, turns some of their harshest critics into their biggest champions. And that's how really the smartest brands grow. They grow stronger and gain strength from building a greater coalition by bringing more people into their fold. That's what Penzeys Spices did. So in the wake of the 2016-2017 election season, Bill Penzy, the CEO of the Spice Company, he took to Facebook and he said, okay, just to be clear, here in these United States, that guy that just got elected, he doesn't represent our viewpoint either. Maybe he's not in line with yours, but here it's an affront to our very company. Because we believe here that cooking is an act of love. And so many of our family favorites come here on the backs of immigrants. And before anybody said like, hey, Spice Boy, stay in your lane, he was like, hey, this is our lane. If we're sourcing pepper, if we're selling Aleppo pepper, that's from a region that is scarred by US foreign policy. So this very much is our lane. Now, as you can imagine, the CEO going rogue on social media and saying, here's what I think, everybody, that attracted a lot of attention. They lost a lot of customers. But they also gained a lot of customers, people that previously didn't consider themselves maybe home chefs. They weren't also subscribing to Cooks Illustrated and hitting the America's Test Kitchen site every day. But people that were like, oh, I've got family members that are getting married, I'm going to buy them that cinnamon gift box, or I've got other family members that maybe have birthdays coming up, or other things that we want to celebrate, we're going to send them spices. What ended up happening is that every time Bill Penzy went to Facebook, and I think also Twitter, and shared his viewpoints about what makes a socially responsible business, every time he was sharing his ideas, they saw their sales leap. They're up 50% year over year since he started taking that approach. If we compare them to their closest competitor, the Spice House based in Milwaukee, they took the approach that politics does not belong in business. They ran a campaign with the discount code No Politics. Their sales did not grow at all. I believe they remained flat or actually dropped off a little. Because as they saw, and as we've all seen, staying out of business, or staying out of politics, is really a position of privilege for businesses that don't want to be in a place where their audience is, with issues that affect their audiences. So we can see how vulnerability is a way of telling people who you are and how you are and if they should trust you, if they should do business with you. It's sharing information that empowers your audience to say, well, do I want to stick around? Do I want to go over there and support that company that maybe I haven't before? Do I want to keep doing business with them? Zoom had to make that call. Also in a, not as much of a, here's who we are, here's what our CEO thinks kind of way, but rather in the position of vulnerability that is an opportunity after a company has screwed up. And we've seen this happen before. Maybe you've seen it in your own organization when either the CEO does something incredibly boneheaded or there's a big scandal that breaks. You have to ask, do we lean in and double down on defeat? Or we take this as an opportunity to maybe bring people closer to our brand? in the beginning of, in early 2020, when the pandemic was reaching pandemic proportions, we saw a big change happening at Zoom. So previously they had 10 million daily business users. Very quickly that jumped to 200 million daily users. Notice I don't say business users, because we saw more than 90,000 schools start to jump on the platform. And preschools were having their morning circle time over Zoom, and they weren't doing things that maybe users would have done in the past, users that were supported by an IT department. They weren't setting meeting passwords. They weren't necessarily screening people coming to those circle times. So as you can imagine, a lot of them got really, really fun really quickly. The problem with that was that now Zoom had to respond. And it could have been a situation of saying, hey, you're all using it wrong. This is not how this platform was meant to work. We weren't meant to support all the people that are using it now, like all of us that were having like cocktail hour over Zoom or birthday parties over Zoom. And the CEO, Eric Yuan, he could have just said, you're using it wrong. But instead, he wrote a blog post, an open post, very quickly that addressed the problem that was happening. And he started out by speaking in the first person. With everything that is going on, I am deeply sorry. And then he quickly pivoted to say, let me give credit now to the company that's going to fix it. Here's what we are going to do to address it. I love the pronouns in there. I love the I am deeply sorry. How often do we get to hear that? Not just from CEOs, but just in general, how often do we get to hear that? He explained what was going on. So he established this voice that was saying, all right, let me bring you all closer. Now I'm going to respect my audience by sharing a volume of detail that doesn't try to like brush things away or dumb things down, but you're smart people, so I'm going to share in a level of detail that I expect that you can understand. We'll ignore the fact that he's using utilizing instead of using, but still, he's speaking in a way that says, hey, come to the table, let us tell you what is going on. And also, here's what we're going to do about it. We appreciate the scrutiny and questions. Now, we're going to move forward, and here's how we're going to shift all of our engineering resources into addressing privacy and security. We're also going to submit to third-party audits. I'm going to be publishing a weekly update on what we're doing. Here's the cadence of communication that you will know what to expect. So it was a move that spoke in a consistent voice with the right level, the right volume of detail for his audience. And with vulnerability, not to push them away or to say, this isn't my problem, but to pull them closer and say, now you know what to expect. We're all in this together. And we can see from that kind of example that coming together around voice and volume and investing in vulnerability and operationalizing those things, it builds trust. Many of us that were using Zoom then are still using Zoom now. We didn't turn away. We expected things to get better. And that idea that things can get better, I think that's a belief that many of us share. We wouldn't be working in making systems, making sites, in making platforms and interfaces for people if we didn't think that what currently exists is okay, but it can be better. We're in the business of making things better. Now, I've talked a lot about how to build trust through voice and volume and vulnerability. As I said, it is our problem. But I think that's also our opportunity. And if you consider that, that's how to do it. I want you to realize that in the jobs that we do, we have potential and power to affect and change that problem. The same way I asked you before to think about the message architecture of your organization, or if you're an independent, maybe of your personal brand, I want you to think, now what is the cost to your organization of not investing in trust and not operationalizing how you earn it? Because I would argue that any organization that's seeking to engage audiences right now needs to look at how we earned trust, what we can do to earn trust. Because yeah, there's a lot of cynics out there. Cynics look at the world as it is and say, it's worse. But I think we who create experiences, as designers and content strategists and developers and everything in between, we look at the world as it is and say, it can be better. And I think that if you embrace that belief and then operationalize it in your work, it will be. Thank you. I wanted to leave time for a couple questions if we have any. I don't know how much time they give us for passing in between, but yes.
I was thinking the whole time when you're talking about detail and terms and conditions, can you talk a little bit about this automatic pilot, like, yeah, I agree, where it's impossible to go through, and even if you could read it all to understand it, how would you handle something like that?
That's a great question. So Catherine asked about content like terms and conditions, when people are just kind of like mousing through it, saying, yeah. Is there an opportunity to build trust there? Is there an opportunity to build engagement? I think if we look at the purpose of that kind of legalese content and zoom out on that, yes, it has to meet the legal standards of our organizations. We've got to keep those people happy because they keep our companies happy. But at the same time, maybe it's an opportunity to teach people the impact of their choices. I've seen some organizations take the approach of adding friction, so it's not just, let me scroll through and say, yep, I got it. But rather, what if we use the opportunity to tell people, in this section, here's what you're agreeing to. You're trading this because we're giving you this. What's the impact of cookies? How are we going to improve the experience? Do I want to trade off on that? It's going to slow down that process, but in slowing down, that's how we help people discover and deliberate and make more conscious choices. So as a result, for some people it might be annoying, like, oh wait, I can't just kind of zoom through this and click OK and on my way. For other people though, they're going to leave that experience subconsciously feeling more empowered, which positions them to better engage with all of your other touch points.
Thank you.
Great, well thank you all very much. As Maya said, there's copies of Trustworthy out there for everybody and all, and I do hope you embrace it and then read it and think, this is important work, how do I do it too? Thank you.